O God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Shalom. It's translated usually as peace. It means so many different things. It can be a verb, meaning to make amends, to make good, to make peace, to restore, to pay in full. So if you shalom something, that means there's no obligations left, it's all good, it's all set, complete. It also, in its noun form, means complete, whole. Shalom is one word capturing that sense that all is right with the world, that all is as it should be. No wonder we long for shalom. Because a lot of the time we have this sense that things are not as they should be. Am I right? And that sense is hard to define in one word, but one way to put that sense into a word is to use a word that has a lot of other baggage, but just try to hear this word and see if this resonates. Sin. A lot of times we think of sin as the bad little individual things that we as individual people do, right? And that we're guilty and bad, and we don't want to sin. But there's another way of understanding that word sin, is that sense that things are not as they should be. That's kind of sin with a capital S, original sin, as opposed to our individual acts of sin. Are you with me for that? The reason I bring that up is because there are different ways to understand sort of the central story of the Bible. Right? It's a story of sin and salvation. And usually when we hear sin and salvation, we tend to think guilt, punishment, and forgiveness. But sin and salvation and the biblical story mean so much more than that. They also mean, sin and salvation in the Bible stories also means bondage and liberation. Right? You think of the Exodus story, being in slavery and being liberated from slavery. Alienation and reconnection. That sense of being alienated from the one in whom we live and move and have our being. We're supposed to be in a state of oneness with God, with the Spirit, with the Holy One. And yet we walk through our day-to-day lives in a sense of separation and alienation from God. And that's another way of understanding sin as separation. Forgiveness is reconnection. Another way to understand sin and salvation is exile and homecoming. And that's what this passage from the prophet Isaiah is talking about today. So Isaiah is speaking to people who have been in exile for a couple of generations. So the superpowers of the day conquered lands by forcibly moving large segments of the population from their homeland to another place. It was a way to keep them from organizing and resisting. It was a good strategy. And so Isaiah is speaking to people who have been uprooted from their home for a couple of generations, as I said. And now he's delivering good news that the time's come for them to go back to their home. Now, not many of us, some of us can identify with exile in that literal sense. I don't know if we can so much as a culture today because we're so mobile anyway. You know, you think about how people move around, and so we don't have that sense of deep rootedness to a particular land and place that people used to have. But I do think that we can identify with exile because it happens not just in a literal geographical sense, but it's also cultural. You might be in a culture that doesn't resonate with you. It can be mental and emotional. It can be spiritual. It's a sense of being out of sorts a bit with the rest of your life. Out of step, out of sync. understand it that way. Yeah, I think even now, as we're heading into Christmas, that the commercialism of our broader culture actually puts us in exile. It puts us in a state of separation from our spiritual wise selves, separation from God. It just forces us into this exile, and it's kind of a winsome exile in many ways. There are a lot of really nice, pretty things that get our attention this time of year, but they put us in exile. And so this message from Isaiah can be a message to us too. It's a message that says you can come home. You can come home for Christmas. You can be delivered from exile and actually get a taste of shalom. And Isaiah's passage for today is kind of an instruction manual, how to come home, how to live into shalom, peace. Because the exiles that he was speaking to didn't have much control over when they could actually go home. And so he was telling them, you can prepare yourself for the gift of peace. Right? You can't create it, you can't make it happen, but there are things that you can do to make a way for peace and wholeness. We can't fix things like that, but we do have some responsibility and control. And this is how he says it so poetically. In the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up. Every mountain shall be made low. The rough ground shall become level. The rugged places a plain. That's how you prepare the way for peace. In other words, do justice. No justice, no peace. Or if you want to spin that positively, K-N-O-W, no justice, no peace. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low, the rough ground shall become level, the rugged place a plain. Think about the world that we inhabit now. Is it a level playing field? Are there still rough places? Are there massive mountains and valleys that need to be leveled out so that everyone has a fair start? Everyone has equal footing. Do we have that now? I want you to just do something. Close your eyes for a minute if you want to. And just think about one instance. It could be in your life, in your own circle of friends, your workplace, the community, our nation. Just think about something in which it's not a level playing field. Think about an instance in our world where the mountains need to be made low and the valleys need to be raised up. Just bring your awareness to it. What can you do to help level that playing field? You can open your eyes if you want to, if they've been closed. You might be thinking, nothing. This problem is much, much bigger than me. But just your act of bringing your awareness to it just now, I promise you, is very powerful. Bringing prayer to it, bringing awareness to it, is just one way of making the plane a little bit more level. And it might just open up ways for you to see things that you can do to make a difference in the world around us, to bring a little bit more shalom into our world. What unmet needs do you see around you? What needs for justice do you hear when you turn on the news? What unmet needs are you aware of within you? Because there's not a whole lot that we can do to help others' unmet needs if we have these massive unmet needs within ourselves. What can you do to help meet those needs. My message to you is that you can do something. Each and every one of us can do something. God gives us the spiritual gifts that we need to help make shalom a little bit more real and tangible in our world. When you do something, you move a little bit closer to Eden, if you will, right? That state of oneness with God that we're meant to know and experience. When we do something to try to meet the unmet needs around us, we get a fuller taste of Emmanuel, which means God with us. Because God with us is the real state of things. You remember last week when we were saying, oh, we expect Jesus to return, and what if Jesus is already here and already has returned? What difference would that make in our lives? I think that's the real state of things. And so may God give us this Advent the grace to work for that, the grace to